Good morning or good afternoon, Tigers. Today we'll be watching a Quizzette video on 7:30. Please make sure that you write your last name, comma, first name, today's date, and the appropriate class color. Today I'll be yellow. Number 1 for all the days is going to be reviewing the number system. So here we're distributing the 4. If you remember correctly, we learned about the distributive property. When you have an integer outside of a parentheses or a quantity, you distribute the 4 by multiplication, and you multiply each term inside of that parentheses. So in this case, we have 4 times 1.25 and 4 times negative 2.25a, or you can just multiply that by 2.25a and keep the subtraction between them. So on the side, you would write 1.25 times 4. Figure out what that is. And then on the other side, you have 2.25 or negative 2.25, doesn't matter, times 4. And make sure you keep the a at the end. All right, so I'm going to do the first one, 1.25 times 4. So 5 times 4 is 20. 2 times 4 is 8. 8 plus 2 is 10. 4 times 1 is 4. 4 plus 1 is 5. I went 2 decimal values, so I bring that at the end. So 1.25 times 4 is 5.00, or $5 is fine. So here I have my 5. And then I'm going to do 2.25 times 4. 4 times 5 is 20. 2 times 4 is 8. 8 plus 2 is 10. 2 times 4 is 8. 8 plus 1 is 9. I have 2 decimal places, 2 decimal places. So I have 9.00a. So the expression, the symbol in the expression is subtraction. So when you distribute that 4, it remains subtraction. So subtraction is conserved. So between these two numbers, you would still have subtraction. Okay, so you could have 5 minus 9.00a, or you can have 5 minus 9a. Those are the same things. It's like writing $9 or just 9. Another way you can do this is you can switch the subtraction into addition, but when you change that into addition, you have to change the sign of the number to the right of it. This is what I mean. 5 plus negative 9a. Those are equivalent. These are all equal to each other. And another thing you can do is you can flip negative 9a and 5, as long as 5 is positive and 9a is negative. So those are all equal to each other. Now let's read the instructions. We should have probably started with that, but that's okay. It says provide 2 equivalent expressions for the following. I gave you 4 equivalent expressions. I gave you the first one. I gave you the second one, the third one, and the fourth one. Okay? Now on Tuesday number 1, it's going to ask you for the same thing. Provide 2 equivalent expressions. Make sure that you provide 2 or more. Okay? Now let's look at Wednesday number 1. Wednesday number 1, it got a little cut off, but it's supposed to say what is the value of. So go ahead and write that for me right there. What is the value of? And I believe you guys have 1/6 plus negative 2/3 minus negative 3. If you also notice on this Quizzette, Monday number 1, Tuesday number 1, Wednesday number 1, Thursday number 1, Friday number 1 are the only problems that you guys have to write an SMP for. You do not have to write an SMP for number 2 or number 3 on this Quizzette. Another thing I want you to notice is that number 1 changes. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. Monday and Tuesday are the same, but Wednesday is different. You have to have the same common denominator to evaluate those fractions. So go ahead and write that on the side somewhere. Let's go ahead and write common denominator so that you guys know what to look for. And the same common denominator just means that you have to have the same number on the bottom of each fraction. So for instance, you have 1/6 plus negative 2/3, you need to have a 6, or you need to have a number that goes evenly into both of those denominators. So I know for a fact that 6 never goes into 3 because 6 is too big. But 3 goes into 6. So I can multiply this fraction right here by 2 over 2, and that'll get me 6 on the bottom, because what is 3 times 2? 6. And what is 2 times 2? 4. And remember to keep your negative sign. And now you can do this. The denominators stay the same. The only thing that changes is this positive 1 and this negative 4. Okay, I'll let you finish that. And then whatever you get here, you multiply by that negative 3. Ooh, I'm sorry, you don't multiply. You subtract that negative 3. But you already know that there's no subtraction. You have to change that to the addition of the opposite. Okay, now let's look at Thursday number 1, 2, and 3, and then Friday number 1, 2, and 3. If you look here, it's about ratios. So you just turn that ratio into a fraction, and then when you have a decimal, you divide. Go ahead and write this. The numerator by the denominator. Divide the numerator by the denominator. Once you convert the ratio into a fraction, you'll remember, and you'll see what I'm talking about. Number 2, does the table show a proportional relationship? If so, what is the equation using R as a constant in proportionality? Here, I told you guys that R represents the constant in proportionality, but I also told you that constant in proportionality means slope in 8th grade. And when you see slope in 8th grade, slope is represented by the letter M. So go ahead and just do that right now. Cross out the R and write M. Cross out the R and write M. Because really this represents slope. A lot of people go their whole lives without recognizing that constant in proportionality is slope. I was one of those people. No one ever told me that they were the same thing. And I didn't figure that out until I started teaching 7th grade math and I made the connection. My life would have been a lot easier if I would have known this in middle school. Okay, so really what we're trying to see if these unit rates or if these ratios divide to be the same number. And if they divide to be the same number, that means that the table is proportional. That means that we have a constant in proportionality. And that means that there is a slope to this graph or to this equation. So our first ratio, remember you write it y to x. So y goes first, then x goes second. So here we would have 15 to 1 or 15 to 1. Now 1 goes into 15 times. I'm done. My second ratio is 30 to 2 or 30 to 2. How many times does 2 go into 30? 15 times. So a lot of you would go, oh, I'm done. No, you have to write the ratios for each one, and you have to make sure that it is in fact equal to 15. Because this is where they trick you. They give you the right answer the first 2 questions, and then all of a sudden you don't have the same number on the third ratio, and your equation is invalid. So our second ratio, y to x, 45 to 3. 3 goes into 45 15 times. So far it is proportional, but we have one more to check. Our second or our last ratio is 60 to 4. Now 4 goes into 60, I will tell you right now, 15 times. So here you have found your constant in proportionality or your slope. I forgot to cross out that R and write M. So this is your slope or your constant in proportionality. This is how you write the equation. Y equals your slope with the x next to it. And our slope here is 15. Done. So again, y equals your slope times x, or x right next to it. Now here's the original question. Does the table show a proportional relationship? Yes, the table shows a proportional, I'm just going to write that, proportional relationship. You guys can abbreviate as well. Number 3, solve. It's supposed to say solve and graph the inequality. So go ahead and write that. Solve and graph the inequality. So we solve this like we would solve a one-step or a two-step equation. The first step in solving a one-step or two-step equation or inequality is undo, addition, or subtraction. Then the second step is undo, multiplication, or division. So step 1, undo, addition, or subtraction. Here I have subtraction of 3. So what is the opposite of subtracting by 3? Adding by 3. Shout out to yellow class. Now I can do 3 or I can do 3.0. It's the same thing. It's like writing money. So on my left-hand side, this -3 or -3 plus 3, it turns into 0. I don't need to rewrite that. What I have left is this -x. And I'm going to bring that down. I'm going to bring my inequality down. And now $5.5 plus $3 is $8.5. Or 8.5. Now, I'm already done with step 1. Now, step 2, undo, multiplication, or division. I want to get x by itself. But there's this negative outside of it. This negative number is actually -1. So I'm going to write a 1 right there. -1. I'll write it in a different color. -1. -1 is being multiplied. So what's the opposite of multiplying by -1? Dividing by -1. What I do on one side, I do to the other. Now when I divide by a negative divided by a negative is positive. So I'm left with just x. And then on the other side, I have a negative divided into a positive number. That makes that positive number negative. So now I have -8.5. Now some of you might remember this. When you divide by a negative or you multiply by a negative, the inequality flips. So it goes this way now. So now instead of greater than, we have less than. X is less than or equal to -8.5. That's the statement. Now let's graph it. All right, so when I graph this, I'm going to graph the positive number, 0, and the negative number. Just so I have a reference of my negatives and my positives on my number line. Here I have -8.5, so I'm going to plot a point on -8.5. Now some of you remember this. When you have an inequality with the equal sign on the bottom, the circle is closed because it's included. If you have an inequality without an equal sign, so if this wouldn't have an equal sign, the circle or the solution would not be included, so it would be an open circle. Now my arrow is pointing to the left because it's all the numbers that are less than or equal to 8.5. The numbers that are less than or equal to -8.5 are all the numbers to the left. These are all the numbers that are less. So that's how I would shade it. That's it. Now the inequality only flips if you divide or subtract. If you divide or multiply by a negative number. So if you look at number 3 on Tuesday, you don't have to flip the inequality. If you look at number 3 on Wednesday, you don't have to flip the inequality. But if you look at number 3 for Thursday, you have to flip the inequality at the end because you're dividing by a -1 again. Number 3, you do not have to flip the inequality. Sorry that the instructions got cut off on number 3. You guys know what to do. You have to solve and graph on each one. All right, Tigers, good luck on this week's Quizzette. If you have questions, you can always use your math notes, or as always, you can raise your hand and ask me any questions.